The late afternoon Iowa sun beat down on the main street of Willow Springs, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Jake Carter tugged the brim of his dusty baseball cap, his tired eyes scanning the crumpled parts list in his calloused hand. The greasy, comforting smell of burgers from the corner diner made his stomach rumble, a sharp reminder that he'd skipped lunch to get the new alternator before the auto parts store closed. As he trudged along the uneven sidewalk, Jake felt the familiar, curious glances from the town locals. He was a stark contrast to the office workers and shopkeepers, a tall, broad-shouldered man built by years of hard labor on the Carter farm. Turning the corner, Jake's eyes landed on the bus stop, and his heart gave a painful jolt. He recognized a silhouette, a woman with familiar brown hair, her back to him as she leaned over a double stroller. Her musical laugh, a sound he hadn't heard in years, carried down the street and made him freeze mid-stride. Madison. Time seemed to warp as Jake stood rooted to the spot, watching. Madison straightened up, revealing two small children nestled in the stroller, a boy and a girl who couldn't be more than 3. The twins were giggling, their faces bright with a pure, childish joy that Jake hadn't witnessed in what felt like a lifetime. A sudden, brutal flashback hit him like a physical blow. The sterile white walls of the Willow Springs Medical Center, Dr. Evans's somber face, the words that had detonated his world. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson, but you're infertile." His entire world collapsing, the dream of a family he and Madison had cherished shattering into a million pieces. Jake blinked, the harsh present rushing back in. His eyes traced the features of the twins, and he felt the blood run cold. The boy, Liam, had his own strong jawline, and the girl, Ava, had his piercing green eyes. It was like staring at photographs from his own childhood. He took an involuntary step back, half hiding behind the thick trunk of an old oak tree, his heart pounding against his ribs as his mind reeled, trying to make sense of the impossible sight before him. How? Years of humiliating tests, expensive treatments, and crushed hopes had all confirmed his inability to have children. Madison leaned down again, adjusting Liam's little cap. The sun glinted in her hair, highlighting strands of gray that hadn't been there the last time he'd seen her. Soft lines around her eyes spoke of laughter and worries he hadn't been a part of. The twins stirred, eager for adventure. Liam stretched a chubby hand, trying to reach a stray dandelion fluff floating by, his wiggling fingers reminding Jake of how he used to reach for the highest apples in the orchard on the farm. Ava, on the other hand, was clutching a small picture book, her green eyes so unnervingly like his, scanning the pages with a fierce concentration he knew all too well. How many nights had he stayed up late, devouring books on crop rotation and animal husbandry? A city bus pulled up to the curb, its diesel engine rumbling, and for a terrifying moment it blocked Jake's view. His throat went tight with panic, terrified Madison and the children would board it and disappear from his life all over again. But when the bus pulled away, they were still there. Madison was now crouched down, gently wiping melted ice cream from Liam's chin. A lump formed in Jake's throat. The simple tenderness of that gesture hit him with the force of a tidal wave, reminding him of everything he had lost or thought he had. The bitter fights, the heavy accusations, the cold, silent nights that had led to their separation suddenly felt distant and meaningless. He took a hesitant step forward, his body moving on its own accord. 1,000 questions exploded in his mind. How is this possible? Why did Madison never tell him? What had happened in the last 3 years? But before he could take another step, the little girl, Ava, looked directly his way. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, their green eyes locked. Jake saw his own shock and confusion mirrored in her young, innocent face. The girl tugged on Madison's sleeve, pointing a small finger in his direction. A wave of pure panic washed over Jake. Madison turned slowly, her eyes widening in disbelief as she recognized him. The world around Jake dissolved. The low hum of the town, the heat of the sun, it all faded into nothing. It was just him, Madison, and the 2 small lives that, in some inexplicable way, felt like a part of him. Madison took a shaky step toward him, her mouth opening as if to speak. Jake felt his legs tremble, unsure if he should run or rush forward to embrace them. At that exact moment, a new bus hissed to a stop, once again blocking his view. When it moved on, the bus stop was empty. Jake stood paralyzed, staring at the vacant space where his ex-wife and the twins had been only seconds before. The crumpled parts list fell from his trembling hand, forgotten on the sidewalk. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree, carrying the faint, distant sound of children's laughter. Jake closed his eyes, his entire world spinning on its axis. When he opened them again, an iron determination had settled in his gaze. He needed answers, and he wouldn't rest until he got them. The familiar groan of the farm gate echoed across the quiet property as Jake pushed it open. The setting sun painted the Iowa sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, casting long, lonely shadows over the fields that had once been his sole pride and joy. Now they just seemed as empty as his heart. Jake left his pickup truck halfway up the dirt drive, too distracted to park it properly. His heavy boots carried him to the wooden porch where he collapsed into the old rocking chair. The rhythmic creaking of the wood was the only sound besides his own ragged breathing. Closing his eyes, Jake couldn't shake the image of the twins, those green eyes, Liam's strong jaw. It was like looking at a reflection from the past. How could it be? Years of pain, frustration, and finally a bitter resignation to a cruel diagnosis flashed through his mind like a home movie in slow motion. The chair's creak transported him back 7 years. "Come on, Marie, it's almost time," Jake had shouted from the bottom of the stairs, his hands trembling with excitement as he held the car keys. Madison had rushed downstairs, her face glowing with hope. "I'm ready. Do you think this time?" Jake had pulled her into a tight hug, burying his face in her fragrant hair. "It has to be honey. We've tried for so long." The drive to the fertility clinic in Des Moines had been filled with vibrant chatter about baby names and their future plans. After 2 years of trying, of tests and disappointments, this new treatment felt like a real light at the end of the tunnel. In the waiting room, Jake held Madison's hand, their fingers woven together in a pact against adversity. When the nurse called Madison's name, they both stood, hearts pounding. Dr. Evans greeted them with a warm smile, but Jake saw a shadow in his eyes. They sat at the doctor's desk, Madison's grip on Jake's hand tightening. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," Dr. Evans began, his voice soft but firm, "I have the results of the latest tests." Jake felt the world slow to a crawl, each word from the doctor a stone dropping into a still lake, sending shockwaves through him. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson, but you're infertile." The silence that followed was a physical thing, heavy and suffocating. Jake felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Beside him, Madison let out a stifled sob. "But how?" Jake finally managed to ask, his voice hoarse. "We've done so many tests." Dr. Evans patiently explained about varicocele, low sperm count, and other medical jargon that Jake could barely process. The words washed over him, leaving only a cold, hollow feeling behind. Madison asked questions, her voice trembling but determined. Jake admired her strength, even as he felt himself sinking into a pit of despair and inadequacy. The drive home was silent, a stark contrast to the hopeful trip out. Jake drove on autopilot, his eyes fixed on the road, but his mind miles away. In the months that followed, the farm that had been his sanctuary became a constant, painful reminder of what they couldn't have. Every newborn calf, every brood of chicks, was like a knife twisting in his chest. Madison tried to stay positive, talking about adoption and other options, but Jake withdrew deeper into himself, spending long hours in the fields to avoid the pitying looks of neighbors and the well-intentioned questions about when they'd start a family. The fights began subtly, small irritations that once would have been laughed off, now igniting into heated arguments. "Jack, please talk to me," Madison pleaded one night, finding him alone on the porch with a half-empty bottle of whiskey. "What is there to say?" he responded bitterly. I'm a failure as a man, as a husband. I can't give you what you want most." Madison knelt before him, tears shimmering in her eyes. "You are all I want, Jack. We can get through this together." But Madison's comforting words only fueled the guilt and shame Jake felt. He pulled away, building walls around his broken heart. The nights became a silent battlefield. Where there had once been passion, there was now only a growing chasm. Jake threw himself into his work, exhausting his body in the hopes of numbing the emotional pain. Madison, meanwhile, immersed herself in books on fertility and alternative treatments. The determination Jake had once admired now grated on him. Every new suggestion, every pamphlet from a specialist felt like another spotlight on his failure. "Maybe if we tried this new therapy," Madison began one morning, holding a colorful brochure. Jake snapped, knocking his coffee mug from the table. "Enough, Marie! Don't you see it's useless? I am useless!" The sound of shattering porcelain echoed through the kitchen, a perfect symbol for their marriage. Jake blinked, returning to the present. The rocking chair was still. He realized silent tears were tracing paths down his dusty cheeks. The sky was now dark, dotted with stars that seemed to mock his solitude. Rising slowly, his muscles protesting after hours of stillness, Jake walked into the empty house. Dusty photos on the mantel captured happier times, their wedding, birthdays, a vacation to the Rockies. In every single one, he and Madison were smiling, full of hope for the future. Stopping in front of one photo, Jake reached out and touched Madison's smiling face. It was taken right after they bought the farm, her eyes shining with dreams of a life together, of a family. The image of the twins at the bus stop rushed back those green eyes, Liam's strong jaw. How? A spark of something, anger, hope ignited in Jake's chest. He needed answers. He needed to understand how his world had been turned inside out in a single afternoon. Determined, Jake picked up the phone, his fingers trembling slightly as he dialed a number he hadn't used in years. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Hello?" Jake took a deep breath, summoning all his courage. "Dr. Robert, this is Jack Thompson. We need to talk about my diagnosis." Dusk settled over the farm, painting the Iowa sky in shades of purple and orange. Jake sat on the porch, a half-empty whiskey bottle at his side, his eyes fixed on the horizon without really seeing it. The creak of the screen door pulled him from his stupor. Madison stepped out, her hesitant steps echoing on the wooden boards. She clutched a white envelope, its edges crumpled from being handled too much. Jake didn't need to ask what it was. Another rejection letter from an adoption agency. "Jack," Madison began, her voice trembling, "we need to talk." He grunted in reply, raising the bottle to his lips. The amber liquid burned his throat, a welcome sensation compared to the constant, dull ache in his chest. Madison sat beside him, her hands twisting the envelope. "I got a call today. The clinic in—" "No," Jake interrupted, his voice rough. "No more clinics, Marie, no more treatments, no more hope. But Jack, this could be our chance. They have new procedure that—" Jake stood up abruptly, the chair squeaking in protest. "Our chance? Don't you see? There is no our chance. I'm the problem, Marie, me." His words hung in the silent yard. Madison flinched, but her eyes shone with determination. "We're a couple, Jack. Your problems are my problems. We can overcome this together." Jake laughed, a bitter, harsh sound. "Overcome? How do we overcome the fact that I'm less of a man than any of those farmers around here with their big families and proud smiles?" Madison stood, touching Jake's arm gently. "You're not less of a man, Jack. You're everything I ever wanted, with or without children." But Madison's comforting words only fueled the anger boiling inside him. Years of frustration, shame, and self-pity burst forth like a dam breaking. "Everything you ever wanted?" he scoffed, pulling away roughly. "Is that why you keep bringing home those damn pamphlets, dragging me from one doctor to another like I'm some kind of experiment?" Madison stepped back, shocked by the venom in his voice. "Jack, I'm just trying to help. We promised we'd do whatever it took." "Whatever it took?" Jake shouted, hurling the whiskey bottle against the side of the house. The sound of shattering glass split the night, making Madison jump. I've done everything. I took every pill, did every humiliating test, listened to every well-meaning neighbor's advice. And for what? To be reminded every damn day that I'm a failure. Tears rolled down Madison's cheeks, but she stood her ground. You're not a failure, Jack. We can still have a family. There are other options. Other options? Jake laughed without humor. Like what? Asking some guy in town to do the job? I can't. Is that what you want, Marie? Madison's slap rang out in the silence that followed. Jake stood stunned, the red imprint of her hand burning on his cheek. How dare you, Madison whispered, her voice trembling with anger and hurt. After all we've been through, how could you think that of me? Jake's rage dissipated as quickly as it had erupted, leaving only a painful emptiness. He took a step toward Madison, regret flooding his eyes. Marie, But before he could finish, he stumbled, still dizzy from the alcohol. His arm swung out instinctively to steady himself, striking Madison in the process. She fell back, hitting the porch railing with a muffled cry. Time froze. Jake stared at his hands in horror, then at Madison, who was cowering against the railing, her eyes wide with fear. My God, Marie, I didn't mean... I would never... Jake stammered, taking a step toward her. Madison scrambled to her feet, keeping her distance. Don't come near me, she said, her voice firm despite her tears. Jake felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. The realization of what he had almost done hit him with the force of a physical blow. Marie, please, it was an accident. I would never hurt you. But Madison was already walking back into the house, her sobs echoing through the night. Jake followed, his heart hammering against his ribs. He found her in the bedroom, throwing clothes into a suitcase on the bed. What are you doing? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Madison didn't look at him, continuing to pack. I'm leaving Jack. I can't do this anymore. No, Marie, please, Jake begged, sobriety rushing back in the face of his panic. It was an accident, I promise. I'll never... Madison finally turned to face him, her eyes red and puffy, but resolute. It's not just about tonight, Jack. It's about the past few months. The yelling, the silence, the drinking. I don't recognize the man I married anymore. Every word was a knife in Jake's heart. He knew she was right. He had lost himself in his own pain and frustration, dragging Madison down with him. We can fix this, he said softly. I'll stop drinking. I'll get help. Just don't go. Madison closed the suitcase and took a deep breath. I love you, Jack. I always will. But I can't stay and watch you destroy yourself, and I can't risk that one day. One day you might really hurt me. Jake felt tears sting his eyes. He wanted to reach for her, to hold her, to promise her everything would be okay. But the fear in her eyes kept him frozen in place. Madison picked up her suitcase and headed for the door. She paused for a moment, looking back. I hope you find peace, Jack, and when you do, maybe we can try again. Jake stood motionless, unable to move as Madison walked downstairs. He heard the front door open and close, the sound of a car engine starting, and then silence. Only when the first rays of sun began to filter through the window did Jake move. He went downstairs slowly, part of him still hoping it was all a nightmare, that Madison would be in the kitchen making coffee like always. But the house was empty. On the kitchen table, Madison's wedding ring glinted, alone, a folded note beside it. With trembling hands, Jake opened the note. When you're ready to be the man I know you are, I'll be waiting. With love, Marie. Jake fell to his knees, sobs racking his body. The reality of what he had lost, of what he had thrown away, hit him with its full, brutal force. Outside, the sun was rising over the farm, a new day beginning. But for Jake, it felt like his world had just gone dark. The small, dimly lit apartment felt suffocating that morning. Madison sat on the edge of the unmade bed, staring at the pregnancy test in her trembling hands. Two bright pink lines stood out, challenging everything she believed was possible. Pregnant? After years of frustrated attempts, shattered hopes, a broken marriage, she was pregnant. Madison let out an incredulous laugh that quickly turned into sobs. Tears streamed down her face as a storm of emotions raged inside her. Joy, fear, confusion, guilt. Getting to her feet on shaky legs, Madison walked to the window. The unfamiliar city stretched out before her, a concrete jungle so different from the green fields of the farm she once called home. 3 weeks had passed since the night she left Jake, and each day felt like a battle to adjust to this new life. Instinctively, her hand rested on her still flat stomach. A miracle was growing inside her, the realization of a dream she and Jake had shared for so long. Jake. The name sent a wave of conflicting emotions through her. Madison turned to the bedroom mirror, studying her reflection. Her eyes were swollen from crying, dark circles etched underneath them, a silent testament to sleepless nights, replaying the turbulent final months of her marriage. The image of Jake's face, twisted with anger on that last night, still haunted her. "What should I do?" she whispered to her reflection, as if expecting it to have the answers. Madison sat at the small kitchen table, a notepad in front of her. Pen in hand, she began listing her thoughts, a method that always helped her organize her mind in times of crisis. Pros of telling Jake, he has the right to know. He's going to be a father. It could be a chance for reconciliation. The child deserves to know their father. Cons. Jake's unstable behavior in recent months. The risk he might not believe her, or accuse her of betrayal. The possibility he'd demand she return, even if he wasn't ready. The fear that stress could negatively affect the pregnancy. Madison looked at the list, feeling the weight of the decision on her shoulders. She still loved Jake, despite everything. The man she had married, kind, strong, full of dreams, was still there somewhere, buried under layers of hurt and frustration. But the Jake of recent months? Madison shuddered at the memory of the shouting, the broken bottles, the fear she felt that last night. She couldn't risk her baby's safety. Her babies, she mentally corrected herself, the possibility of twins suddenly crossing her mind. With a heavy sigh, Madison picked up the phone, her fingers hovering over the numbers. The urge to call Jake was almost irresistible. But then she remembered the look in his eyes that night, the rage mixed with despair. What if he didn't believe her? What if he accused her of cheating? The stress of such a confrontation could be dangerous for the pregnancy. Taking a deep breath, Madison dialed a different number. "Hello, Mom?" Her voice quivered slightly. "I need a favor." In the weeks that followed, Madison found herself in a whirlwind of activity. Her mother, worried but understanding, helped her find an apartment in a distant city, far enough that Jake wouldn't easily find her, yet close enough for her family to help. Every box packed, every decision made, weighed on her heart. Madison knew she was depriving Jake of the chance to be a father, something he had always desperately wanted. But the memory of his erratic behavior, the drinking, the near violence, bolstered her resolve. "It's for the babies," she would murmur to herself, stroking her belly, a routine that became increasingly frequent. Moving day arrived with a cloudy dawn. Madison took one last look at the small apartment that had been her refuge for the past few weeks. Silent tears streamed down her face as she closed the door, knowing she was also closing a chapter of her life. The trip to the new city was long and quiet. Madison watched the scenery change outside the car window, fields giving way to suburbs, and finally, a bustling metropolis. Her heart ached at the thought of Jake, alone on the farm, unaware that his dreams of fatherhood were about to come true. Upon arriving at the new apartment, Madison was greeted by her mother, who enveloped her in a tight hug. "Are you sure about this, dear?" her mother asked softly, helping her carry bags inside. Madison nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "It's the only way to protect them, Mom, Jack. He's not well. I can't risk it." In the weeks that followed, Madison settled into her new life. She found a part-time job at a local bookstore, had her first prenatal checkup, and began planning the nursery for twins as the ultrasound confirmed she was expecting 2 babies. Each pregnancy milestone was bittersweet. The first time she felt the babies move, the first time she heard their heartbeats, moments she had always imagined sharing with Jake. One evening, sitting in her new living room, Madison flipped through a photo album. Pictures of happier times, her and Jake on their wedding day, working together on the farm, planning their future. Her fingers traced Jake's smiling face in one of the photos. "Your parents love you very much," she whispered to her growing belly. "Even if we can't be together right now." Madison knew that one day she'd have to face the truth, that Jake would discover the twins, that she'd have to explain her decision. But for now, her priority was ensuring a safe and peaceful start for her children. Setting the album aside, Madison picked up a notebook and began to write a letter to Jake, explaining everything: the pregnancy, her fears, her hopes. A letter she wasn't sure she'd ever have the courage to send, but needed to write for both him and herself. "Dear Jack," she began, tears staining the paper, "there's something you need to know." As the night wore on, Madison kept writing, pouring her heart onto the paper. Outside, the city pulsed with life, indifferent to the drama unfolding in that small apartment. And within Madison, 2 lives grew, unaware of the emotional turmoil surrounding their arrival into the world. The sun had barely risen on the horizon when Jake Carter was already up, his lone silhouette outlined against the pink dawn sky. His eyes, once full of life, were now dull and distant as he scanned the fields of his farm with a critical, hollow gaze. 3 years had passed since Madison left, taking with her the warmth and joy that once filled that property. 3 long years of deafening silence, endless nights, and days that dragged on like eternity. Jake adjusted his worn hat and began his daily routine, mechanical and precise, the routine of a man who had turned work into his only reason to live. The creak of the barn door, the lowing of the cows, the rustling of leaves under his boots, these were the only sounds that broke the farm's oppressive silence. As he worked, memories of a not-so-distant past assailed him. Madison's laughter echoing through the kitchen, the gentle touch of her hand in his as they walked the fields at sunset, the shared dreams of a family now as distant as the stars. Jake shook his head, shooing away the memories like troublesome flies. There was no room for sentimentality in his life now. Every emotion, every thought of Madison was carefully suppressed, buried under layers of hard work and iron will. Neighbors and friends who once frequented the farm regularly now kept their distance. The warm smiles and lively conversations had been replaced by hesitant waves and looks of concern. Jake pushed them all away, building walls around his broken heart with the same diligence he gave his land. As months turned into years, the Carter farm flourished. The fields had never been so productive, the livestock never so healthy. Jake poured all his energy, frustration, and pain into his work, as if trying to prove something to himself, to Madison, to the world, even though he didn't really know what. On the rare occasions he went to town on business, Jake couldn't help but search for Madison in every passing face. His eyes swept the streets, hoping against all hope to catch a sight of that familiar brown hair, to hear that laughter that still echoed in his dreams. One afternoon, after completing a particularly lucrative cattle sale, Jake allowed himself a stop at the local bar, something he had avoided since Madison left. The smoky atmosphere and the buzz of conversations made him uneasy, reminding him how isolated he'd become. That was when he heard a familiar voice. Bob, an old neighbor, sat at the counter, gesturing animatedly as he spoke to the bartender. Jake hesitated, torn between preserving his solitude and the sudden need for human contact. Before he could decide, Bob spotted him. "Jack, my God, it's been too long," he shouted, waving him over. Reluctantly, Jake joined him at the counter. Bob, ever talkative, began babbling about the latest regional news, harvests, and weather. Jake responded in monosyllables, his eyes fixed on his glass. Then Bob said something that made Jake's heart skip a beat. "You know, Jack, I thought I saw Marie in the next town over the other day. I found it odd since—" Jake turned sharply, cutting him off. "What? Where exactly did you see her?" he asked, his voice raspy from disuse, sounding strange even to his own ears. Bob, startled by Jake's sudden interest, stammered. "Well, I'm not sure it was her. It was just a quick glimpse, you know, near that new supermarket on Main Street, but I could have sworn." Jake was already on his feet, throwing some bills on the counter. "Thanks, Pierre," he muttered, rushing out of the bar, leaving a confused Bob and an untouched glass of whiskey behind. The drive back to the farm passed in a blur, Jake's mind racing with years of repressed emotions threatening to spill over. Madison, in the next town over? After all this time? Why would she come back? What if— Jake braked abruptly, nearly skidding on the dirt road that led to the farm. He couldn't allow himself hope. Not again. The pain of losing Madison had nearly destroyed him once. He couldn't risk going through that again. But even as he tried to stifle the flicker of hope in his chest, Jake found himself making plans. Tomorrow, he decided, tomorrow he would head to that town. Just to be sure. Just to see with his own eyes. That night, for the first time in 3 years, Jake dreamed. He dreamed of Madison, the life they could have had, the family they'd always wanted. And when he woke, his face wet with unshed tears, something inside him had changed. The cold, distant man he had become over the past 3 years began to crack, small fissures appearing in his carefully built armor. As he got ready to leave for town, Jake caught his reflection in the steamy bathroom mirror. The eyes staring back at him were different. There was a brightness there, a spark of something that had long been absent. Hope? Jake straightened the collar of his clean shirt, the first he'd worn in months that wasn't stained from farm work, and stepped out into the new day. The sun rose on the horizon, painting the sky in gold and pink hues as though the universe itself were celebrating this moment of rebirth. Driving toward the neighboring town, Jake had no idea what he would find. But for the first time in 3 long, lonely years, he allowed himself to feel something other than pain and regret. He allowed himself to feel hope. The farm grew smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror, the green fields shrinking behind him with every mile he covered. Jake felt layers of coldness and distance peeling away, revealing the man he used to be, the man Madison had loved, the man who perhaps still had a chance to get back everything he had lost. The alarm's shrill ringing barely had time to echo through the small apartment before Madison silenced it with a quick tap. Her eyes, still heavy with sleep, opened slowly, adjusting to the dim light of the room. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to lie there, savoring the last seconds of peace before the day began. "Mommy," Ava's high-pitched voice broke the silence, followed by Liam's soft cry. Madison smiled despite her fatigue. No matter how exhausted she was, hearing her children's voices always warmed her heart. Getting up, she went to the room next door, where the twins, who now almost 3, awaited her in their beds. "Good morning, my loves," Madison sang, picking Liam up while helping Ava climb out of her bed. Ava's messy hair and Liam's sleepy eyes were perfect mirrors of each other, and of Jake. The thought made Madison's heart tighten for a moment, as it always did when she noticed the similarities. The next few minutes were a familiar dance of changed diapers, dressed children, and small disagreements resolved. Madison moved through the apartment with the efficiency of someone who'd perfected a routine out of necessity and repetition. "Emma, sweetie, please eat your fruit," Madison pleaded, trying to get Ethan to drink his milk. "Ethan, look at Mommy. The milk is good, see." Juggling 2 stubborn toddlers, getting herself ready for work, and trying to gulp down her now cold coffee, Madison felt that familiar wave of exhaustion and guilt. Was she doing enough? Did the children miss having a father? Jake's face flashed in her mind, as it did so often. What would he think if he could see his kids now? The pride in his eyes when Ava spoke her first word, the worry when Liam had a high fever months ago. All these experiences, these precious moments, Jake was missing. Madison shook her head, pushing the thoughts away. She couldn't afford to get lost in what-ifs right now. There was a full day ahead. After dropping the children at daycare, a luxury she could barely afford but needed so she could work, Madison rushed to the small bookstore where she worked part-time. The rest of her time was divided between freelance translation work and caring for the twins. Hours at the bookstore passed in a blur of customers, organizing shelves and processing orders. Madison loved being surrounded by books, the smell of fresh pages, and the promise of untold stories. Sometimes she found herself glancing at the farming section, thinking of Jake and the farm she once called home. When her shift ended, Madison hurried to pick up the kids. The ride home was filled with Ava's animated stories of her day and Liam's occasional comments. He was always the quieter one. As they passed the local park, Madison heard a familiar voice call her name. "Marie, Marie Thompson, is that you?" Turning, Madison came face to face with Lisa, an old friend from her days on the farm with Jake. Her heart pounded, a mix of joy at seeing a familiar face and fear of what that connection to her past might bring. "Sarah, what a surprise to see you here," Madison managed to say, forcing a smile as she instinctively pulled the twins closer. Lisa's eyes widened at the sight of the children. "Oh my gosh, Marie, are they yours? They're adorable, and they look so much like—" Her voice trailed off, the unfinished sentence hanging between them. Madison felt her stomach twist. "Yes, these are Emma and Ethan," she said softly, brushing her hands over the twins' hair. "Kids, say hello to Ms. Sarah." While the children greeted her shyly, Madison could see the gears turning in Lisa's mind. The surprise, followed by recognition, and then pity? Disapproval? "Marie, I didn't know you had kids," Lisa began haltingly. Jack never mentioned. Jake's name hung in the air, laden with unasked questions and hidden truths. Madison took a deep breath, preparing for the conversation she knew she'd eventually have. "Sarah, it's a long story. Maybe we can get coffee sometime and talk." Lisa nodded, her eyes still on the twins. Of course, I'd love that. It's just that, Marie, they look so much like Jack. Does he know?" The question lingered, heavy and inevitable. Madison felt tears threaten, but held them back. "It's complicated, Sarah. Please understand. I did what I thought was best to protect my kids." Lisa seemed to want to say more, but something in Madison's gaze stopped her. Instead, she simply nodded, a mixture of understanding and concern in her eyes. "Well, it was great seeing you, Marie, and meeting these adorable little ones. I hope we can meet soon and talk more." After Lisa left, Madison stood for a moment, feeling the weight of her secret more than ever. Ava tugged on her hand, pulling her back to reality. "Mommy, who was that lady?" Ava asked, her big green eyes so much like Jake's, brimming with curiosity. Madison forced a smile. "Just an old friend, honey. Let's go home. It's getting late." As they walked, Madison couldn't stop thinking about how her past and present had collided in that brief encounter. Lisa knew Jake, likely still kept in touch. How long would it take for news of the twins to reach him? That night, after putting the children to bed, Madison sat at the kitchen table with an old box of memories open before her. Photos of happier times, unsent letters, the pregnancy test that changed everything, all fragments of a life that felt like it had happened ages ago. Picking up a photo of Jake, Madison traced the contours of his face with her finger. "What do I do?" she whispered to the silent image. "How do I protect them and still be fair to you?" The answers didn't come, only the soft sound of the twins breathing in the next room reminded her of what was at stake. With a sigh, Madison put the photo back and closed the box. Tomorrow would be another day, filled with the challenges and joys of single motherhood. But now that her past threatened to catch up with her, Madison knew difficult decisions would have to be made soon. The future, once so certain, was now cloudy and uncertain. But there was one thing Madison knew for sure. She would do anything to protect her children, no matter the cost. The rumble of Jake's old truck echoed through the streets of the neighboring town, breaking the morning stillness. For weeks, ever since his conversation with Bob at the bar, Jake had been making these trips, his keen eyes scanning every face, every corner, hoping for a glimpse of Madison. Jake's heart raced each time he saw a brown-haired woman pass by, only to sink again when he realized it wasn't her. The town, once so ordinary, now felt like a maze of possibilities and disappointments. Parking near the supermarket Bob had mentioned, Jake turned off the engine and sat for a moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "What am I doing?" he muttered to himself. Part of him knew this was crazy, that after 3 years, Madison could be anywhere, but another part, the part that had never stopped loving her, couldn't give up. Getting out of the truck, Jake strolled slowly along the sidewalk, his gaze sweeping every store, every cafe. That was when he passed a small bookstore and something caught his eye. In the window, among the displayed books, was a flyer for a reading club. The name Marie was handwritten in one corner. Jake's heart leaped. Could it be her? Rushing inside, the bell above the door announcing his entrance, Jake headed for the counter. "Excuse me," he began, his voice hoarse with anxiety. "That flyer in the window, the Marie mentioned. Do you know her?" The young woman behind the counter looked at him curiously. "Marie?" "Oh, yes. She works here part-time." "Why? Do you know her?" Jake felt the ground vanish beneath his feet. "Madison. This close. All along." Yes, we're old friends." "When will she be in?" The employee hesitated, clearly uneasy with Jake's intensity. "I'm sorry, I can't give out information about our employees, but if you'd like to leave a message." Jake shook his head, muttering a thank you before stepping out quickly. Outside, he leaned against the bookstore wall, heart pounding. Madison was here. She was alive, well, working. But why hadn't she come back? Why hadn't she reached out? Over the following days, Jake split his time between tending the farm and watching the bookstore from a distance, always waiting. But Madison remained elusive, like a ghost he couldn't catch. It was on an especially frustrating afternoon that Jake made a decision. Sitting in his truck, observing the bookstore, he took out his phone and dialed a number he'd kept for years but never used. "Hawthorne Private Investigations. David speaking," came the voice on the other end. Jake took a deep breath. "Mr. Hawthorne, my name is Jack Thompson. I need your help to find someone." In the days that followed, Jake met several times with Tom Harrison at a discreet cafe on the outskirts of town. The private investigator, a middle-aged man with shrewd eyes and a gentle demeanor, listened attentively as Jake told his story, omitting only the most painful details. "So, Mr. Thompson," Tom said, flipping through his notes, "you want me to locate your ex-wife Marie and find out why she's in town but hasn't contacted you." Jake nodded, feeling both hopeful and guilty. "I know it seems invasive, but I need to know if she's okay, if she needs help, and if there's any chance to fix things." Tom raised a hand gently, stopping him. "I understand, Mr. Thompson. I'll do my best to gather information discreetly and respectfully." Over the following weeks, Jake oscillated between hope and anxiety. Each phone call from Tom sent his heart racing, but the information trickled in, frustrating fragments. Madison worked at the bookstore. She lived in a nearby apartment. She kept to herself with few friends. Then, on a rainy afternoon, Tom called, tension in his voice. "Mr. Thompson, I think we need to meet. I have information you need to hear in person." The cafe was nearly empty when Jake arrived, soaked from the rain and trembling with anticipation. Tom was already there, a thick folder in front of him on the table. "Jack," Tom began, using his first name for the first time. "What I'm about to tell you may be shocking. I ask that you hear me out before reacting." Jake nodded, his stomach in knots. Tom opened the folder, revealing several photos. Marie isn't alone in town. She has company. With trembling hands, Jake picked up the first photo. In it, Madison walked down the street, holding the hands of two small children, a boy and a girl, appearing to be twins. "They're about 3 years old," Tom said gently. "Born roughly 6 months after you two separated." Jake stared at the photo, unable to process what he was seeing. Even in that grainy image, the children's features were unmistakably familiar. The boy's jawline, the girl's eyes. "But how?" Jake managed to stammer. "I'm infertile," the doctor said. Tom leaned forward, his voice soft but firm. "Jack, given the timing and the physical similarities, there's a strong possibility these children are yours." The world around Jake seemed to spin. Memories flooded his mind. The devastating diagnosis, the failed attempts, the fights, the separation, and now this. I have children?" Jake's voice was barely a whisper, laden with emotion. Tom nodded slowly. "It appears so, which raises serious questions about the accuracy of your original diagnosis." Jake barely heard him. His eyes were glued to the photos, drinking in every detail of the children's faces, of Madison. There was so much love in her eyes as she looked at the twins, so much care in every gesture. "Why didn't she tell me?" Jake murmured, more to himself than to Tom. The investigator sighed. "Only Marie can answer that, but considering the circumstances of your separation—" Jake closed his eyes, recalling that last night together, the anger, the near accident. Shame flooded him. She was protecting them. From me. A heavy silence fell over the table. Jake continued to stare at the photos, years of suppressed emotions threatening to overflow. Anger, sadness, joy, guilt, all swirling in his chest. "What do you plan to do now, Jack?" Tom asked gently. Jake tore his gaze from the photos, a newfound determination shining in his eyes. "I need to talk to her. I need to meet my children, and I need to fix what I broke so long ago." As the rain continued to fall outside, Jake felt as though a new chapter in his life was about to begin. A chapter of redemption, second chances, and maybe, just maybe, a family he never thought he'd have. The Willow Springs Park was filled with children's laughter and the buzz of conversations from parents on that sunny Saturday afternoon. Jake sat on a bench under a large oak tree, feeling his heart pound in his chest. His hands, usually steady after years of farm work, trembled slightly as he held the piece of paper with the address Tom had given him. His eyes scanned the playground over and over, searching for the face that had haunted his dreams for 3 long years. And then he saw her. Madison entered the park pushing a double stroller. Even from a distance, Jake could see the changes in her: shorter hair, a few gray strands at her temples, a new confidence in her stride. But it was her, without a doubt. Jake stood, his legs feeling like jelly. He watched as Madison lifted the children from the stroller, a boy and a girl, just like the photos. The boy, Liam, ran immediately to the swings, while the girl, Ava, clung shyly to Madison's leg. Taking a deep breath, Jake began walking toward them. Each step felt like an eternity, the world around him fading until only he, Madison, and the children remained. It was the little girl who saw him first. Her big green eyes, so much like his, widened in curiosity. She tugged on Madison's sleeve, pointing at him. Madison turned, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. Their eyes met for the first time in 3 years, and Jake saw a flurry of emotions cross her face. Surprise, fear, and something that might have been longing. "Jack," Madison whispered, her voice barely audible over the park noise. "Marie," he replied, stopping a few steps away. I found you." Madison instinctively pulled the girl closer. "How? What are you doing here?" Jake took a step forward, his eyes moving between Madison and the children. "I had to see you. I had to know." "Marie, why didn't you tell me?" The little girl looked curiously between the 2 adults, sensing the tension. The boy, realizing something was happening, ran back to his mother. Madison closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. When she opened them, there was determination in her gaze. "Kids, why don't you go play on the slide for a minute? Mommy needs to talk to this friend." Reluctantly, the children walked away, casting curious glances at Jake as they left. "Jack, Madison began, but he cut her off. "They're mine, aren't they?" he asked, his voice trembling with emotion. "The twins. They're my kids." Madison nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. "Yes, Jack, Emma and Ethan are your children." Jake felt as though the ground had vanished beneath him. Even suspecting it, hearing confirmation was overwhelming. But how? "The doctor said I was infertile. We tried for so long. I found out I was pregnant a few weeks after I left," Madison explained, her voice low. It was a shock to me, too." "Why didn't you tell me?" Jake asked, hurt evident in his voice. "I had a right to know." Madison looked at the kids playing in the distance before turning her gaze back to Jake. "Do you remember how you were back then, Jack? The drinking, the anger?" "I was afraid. Afraid of how you'd react. Afraid of what you might do." Her words struck Jake like a punch to the stomach. He remembered that last night, Madison's scream, the fear in her eyes when he almost, I would never have hurt you, or the kids," he said, his voice breaking. "I know that now, Jack," Madison replied softly. "But back then, I had to protect them, even if it meant keeping you away." Jake looked at Liam and Ava, taking in every detail of their faces, their movements. "They're so perfect," he murmured. A small smile appeared on Madison's face. "They are. Emma has your temperament, you know. And Ethan? Well, he loves nature as much as you do." For a moment they stood in silence, watching the children play. Jake felt his heart swell in a way he'd never thought possible. He had children, a family. But then a nagging doubt surfaced. "Marie," he began hesitantly, I need to be sure. You understand, right? After all we went through, the diagnosis." Madison nodded, understanding before he finished. "You want a paternity test?" "Not that I don't believe you," Jake hurried to clarify. "It's just—" "I understand, Jack," Madison interrupted gently. "After everything, you deserve that certainty. And honestly, it might be good for us both to have official confirmation." Jake felt a wave of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Marie. I want to be part of their lives, if you'll let me." Madison looked at him for a long moment, as if evaluating him. "A lot has changed, Jack. We've both changed. It won't be easy." "I know," Jake replied, his voice steady. "But I'm willing to do whatever it takes, for them and for you, if you'll give me a chance." Right then, Liam and Ava came running back. "Mommy, who's he?" Ava asked, her curious eyes fixed on Jake. Madison and Jake exchanged a look, years of history and unspoken emotions passing between them in seconds. "Kids," Madison began gently, "this is Jack. He's an old friend of Mommy's, and he'll be around more often now." Jake knelt down to their level. "Hello, Emma. Hello, Ethan," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." As the children looked at him in curiosity, Jake felt a mixture of fear and hope. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with explanations, adjustments, and likely painful moments. But looking at his children, Jake knew he would face any challenge. The family he'd never thought he'd have was right there in front of him, and he would do everything in his power to mend the past and build a future together. The white envelope felt like it weighed a ton in Jake's hands. Sitting at Madison's kitchen table, he stared at the lab seal, his heart thudding in his chest. Across from him, Madison watched in silence, her own hands clasped tightly together. "Do you want me to open it?" Madison asked softly, breaking the tense silence. Jake shook his head. "No, I need to do it." With trembling fingers, he tore open the envelope and pulled out the paper. His eyes raced through the medical terms and percentages, landing on the bold conclusion at the bottom. Probability of paternity, 99.999%. Jake let out a ragged breath, tears forming in his eyes. "They're mine," he whispered, looking at Madison. "They're really mine." Madison nodded, a gentle smile on her lips. "I never doubted it, Jack. They look so much like you." For a moment, they were silent, the weight of the confirmation hovering between them. Then Jake's expression shifted, a shadow crossing his face. "But how?" he asked, his voice tinged with confusion and a flicker of anger. "Dr. Roberts said I was infertile. We spent years trying, Marie. Years." Madison reached out, gently touching Jake's arm. "I know. I don't understand it either. Maybe we should see Dr. Robert and ask for explanations." Jake nodded, determination gleaming in his eyes. "Yes, we need answers. Everything we went through, the pain, the separation, all because of a wrong diagnosis." In the frantic days that followed, Jake and Madison dug into their investigation. Phone calls were made, medical records requested, and finally, an appointment was scheduled with Dr. Evans. The doctor's office felt smaller than Jake remembered, its white walls oppressive as he and Madison waited. When Dr. Evans walked in, his eyes widened in surprise to see the couple back together. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," he greeted hesitantly. "What a surprise to see you. How can I help?" Jake stood, handing him the paternity test results. "You can start by explaining this, Doctor." Dr. Evans visibly paled as he read the document. This is impossible. The diagnosis was wrong," Madison interjected, her voice firm. "We have 3-year-old twins, Doctor, Jack's biological children." The doctor sank into his chair, running a hand over his face. "My God, I don't know what to say." There was obviously a grave error. "An error?" Jake burst out, years of pain and frustration boiling over. "An error that cost us our marriage, that made me miss the first years of my kids' lives." Madison placed a hand on Jake's arm to calm him before turning back to the doctor. "Dr. Robert, we need to understand exactly what happened. How could an error like this occur?" Over the next few hours, Dr. Evans painstakingly reviewed old files, made phone calls to colleagues, and finally reached a devastating conclusion. "So, there was a sample mix-up at the lab," he explained, his voice heavy with remorse. "Your test, Mr. Thompson, was mixed up with another patient's. The infertility diagnosis wasn't yours." The silence that followed was deafening. Jake felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. All the suffering, the sleepless nights, the fights, the separation, all because of such a basic mistake. How could this happen?" Madison asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Dr. Evans shook his head, seeming older and defeated. "It was a terrible human error. The lab was overloaded at the time. There was a labeling failure. There aren't enough excuses for what happened to you." Jake stood abruptly, walking to the window. His mind whirled with the implications of everything they'd learned. "All these years," he murmured. "All we lost." Madison joined him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Jack, we can't change the past, but now we have answers. We can move forward." Turning to the doctor, Jake asked, "What about the other patients? How many more might have been affected by errors like this?" Dr. Roberts seemed to shrink in his chair. "I'll begin a complete review of all cases from that period. This can't happen again." In the days that followed, Jake and Madison met with lawyers discussing their options. The decision to sue Dr. Evans and the lab for medical negligence wasn't easy, but both felt it was necessary. "It's not just about us," Madison explained to Jake one night as they talked it over. "It's for all the other couples who might have gone through or are going through the same thing. We have to make sure this never happens again." Jake nodded, holding Madison's hand. "You're right. And maybe this will help us find some closure." The lawsuit was long and emotionally exhausting. Jake and Madison had to relive years of pain and frustration, laying bare their personal story in testimonies and hearings. But as the case progressed, something unexpected happened. They began to reconnect. Long conversations after meetings with lawyers, quiet moments of shared reflection, mutual comfort in the face of painful memories, all gradually rebuilt the bond they once had. Finally, after months of legal battles, a settlement was reached. The hospital and lab admitted negligence, agreeing to implement new safety protocols and provide financial compensation to Jake and Madison. Sitting in their attorney's office, looking at the settlement documents, Jake and Madison exchanged glances. "It's over," Madison said softly. "It's really over." Jake nodded, a mixture of relief and sadness in his voice. "Yes, but in a way, it's also just beginning, isn't it?" Madison smiled, fully understanding what he meant. A new chance. For us. For our family. As they left the office, holding hands for the first time in years, Jake felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was full of possibilities. "Shall we pick up the kids from preschool?" he suggested, a timid smile on his lips. Madison squeezed his hand, her eyes gleaming. "Yes, let's. It's time we start our new story together." And so, under the afternoon sun, Jake and Madison walked toward a future that just months before they would have deemed impossible. A future of redemption, forgiveness, and above all, love. The sun had barely risen when Jake parked his truck in front of Madison's small apartment. His palms were sweaty on the steering wheel, nerves making his stomach churn. Today was the day. His first full day with Liam and Ava. Madison opened the door, the twins peeking out from behind her legs, looking curiously at Jake. "Good morning," Jake said softly, kneeling to the children's level. "Ready for a day at the farm?" Ava, always bolder, took a step forward. "Are we going to see animals?" Jake smiled, feeling his heart melt. "Sure thing, Princess. We've got cows, chickens, and even some bunnies." Liam's eyes lit up at the mention of bunnies, though he stayed quiet. Madison watched the interaction with mixed emotions. Seeing Jake with the children felt surreal, a glimpse of what could have been, of what might still be. But the memory of the Jake from 3 years ago, angry and on the brink of violence, still lingered in her mind. "Remember Jack?" she said quietly, as the children ran off to grab their backpacks. "They're still adjusting to all this. Take it slow." Jake nodded, determination clear in his eyes. "I know, Marie. I promise I'll be patient. I want to do this right." The trip to the farm was filled with Ava's excited questions and the occasional shy comment from Liam. Jake answered each one enthusiastically, his heart swelling with every laugh and expression of wonder from the children. When they arrived, Liam and Ava stood open-mouthed at the vast fields and rustic beauty of the farmhouse. "Wow," Liam whispered, eyes wide. "It's so big," Jake chuckled, scooping the boy into his arms. "And it's all ours to explore. What do you want to see first?" "Bunnies," both children shouted in unison. As they headed toward the rabbit pen, Jake noticed Madison watching from a distance, a hesitant smile on her lips. He waved for her to join them, but she shook her head, giving them space. The day passed in a whirlwind of activities. Jake showed the kids how to feed the chickens, let them help milk a patient cow, and even took them on a tractor ride through the fields. Each moment was precious, every giggle, every spontaneous hug, a balm to his heart. By late afternoon, as the children napped on the living room couch, worn out from so much adventure, Jake joined Madison on the porch. "They're amazing," he said softly, emotion evident in his voice. "I can't believe I missed 3 years of this." Madison looked at him, noticing the subtle changes. The bitter, angry man she had left behind seemed gone, replaced by someone gentler, more patient. "You're doing great with them," she admitted. "They're already getting attached to you." Jake smiled, but a shadow of sadness crossed his eyes. "Marie, I'm sorry for everything, for how I acted, the things I said and did. I know words aren't enough, but I'm working to be better. For them and for you, if you'll give me a chance." Madison was silent for a moment, letting Jake's words sink in. Part of her wanted to throw herself into his arms, forgive everything, and start over. But the cautious part, the one that had protected the twins for so long, held back. "It'll take time, Jack," she finally said. "Trust, once broken, isn't easy to rebuild. But I'm willing to try. For the twins. And for us." The following weeks brought a new routine. Jake divided his time between managing the farm and regular visits with the twins. He made every effort to be present, not just for the fun moments, but for the daily responsibilities, helping with chores, reading bedtime stories, handling the occasional tantrum. Ava quickly became Jake's adventure partner, always eager to explore every corner of the farm. Liam, on the other hand, was more reserved, preferring quieter moments, observing nature, or helping Jake with calmer tasks. One day, as Jake showed Liam how to plant seeds in the garden, the boy looked up at him with big green eyes and asked, "Why didn't you live with us before?" Jake felt his heart clench. Choosing his words carefully, he replied, "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, Ethan. I made some mistakes that hurt your mom, and I needed time to learn to be a better person. But now I'm here, and I promise, I always will be." Liam nodded solemnly, seeming to understand more than Jake's words implied. "I'm glad you're here now, Daddy," he said softly, using that title for the first time. Jake fought back tears, pulling his son into a tight hug. As days turned to weeks, and weeks to months, the changes in Jake became increasingly evident. He sought professional help to deal with his past anger and frustration, determined never again to be the man who almost lost everything. Madison watched this transformation with a mix of admiration and caution. Slowly, she began lowering her own defenses, allowing herself to imagine a future where they could be a family again. One evening, after tucking the kids into bed, Jake and Madison sat on the farm's porch, gazing at the stars. "Thank you," Jake said quietly, "for giving me this second chance. I know I don't deserve it, but I promise I won't waste it." Madison smiled, tears glinting in her eyes. "I'm proud of you, Jack, of the father you've become, of the man you're striving to be." As the night wore on, Jake reflected on his journey. The mistakes of the past still weighed on him, but now there was hope. Hope for a bright future filled with the love and joy of his newfound family. And he would do everything possible to be worthy of that love, every day for the rest of his life. Twilight painted the sky in oranges and pinks as Jake and Madison walked side by side through the farm fields. The children were already in bed after a day full of play, leaving the adults a rare moment of privacy. The silence between them was comfortable, but laden with unspoken words. Jake knew it was time to confront the past head-on. "Marie," he began softly, "I think it's time we talked about everything." Madison nodded, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "Yes, I think so too." They stopped near an old oak tree, the same one where they had first exchanged "I love yous" so many years ago. Jake turned to face Madison, his heart heavy with remorse. "Why didn't you tell me about the pregnancy?" he asked gently. "I would have been there for you, for them." Madison closed her eyes for a moment, summoning courage. When she opened them, they brimmed with unshed tears. "I was afraid, Jack," she admitted. "That last night, when you almost... I saw something in your eyes I'd never seen before. Anger, desperation. I feared for the baby, for myself." Jake felt like he'd been punched in the gut. The memory of that night, blurred by alcohol and rage, still haunted him. "I never would have hurt you or the kids, Marie," he said, his voice cracking. "I know that now," Madison replied gently. "But at the time, I wasn't sure. And when I discovered I was carrying twins, I had to protect them, above all else." Jake nodded, tears sliding down his face. "I'm so sorry, Marie. More than I can say. My behavior, my coldness. I let pain and frustration turn me into someone I don't recognize." He knelt down in front of her, taking her hands in his. "I beg your forgiveness, Marie, for everything. I know I don't deserve it, but I hope someday you can truly forgive me." Madison gazed at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. Slowly, she knelt beside him. "Jack, But before she could continue, her expression changed, a shadow crossing her face. "What is it?" Jake asked, worried. Madison took a deep breath. "There's something I need to tell you, something that might change everything." Jake's heart began to race. "What is it?" I got a job offer, Madison said, her voice trembling slightly. An incredible opportunity, Jack, an editor-in-chief position at a major publishing house, the kind of job I've always dreamed of. Jake felt a surge of pride and apprehension. That's wonderful, Marie. You deserve it. It's in New York, Madison interrupted softly. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake felt as though the ground had disappeared under his feet. New York, thousands of miles from the farm, from the life they were rebuilding. Oh, was all he managed to say? Madison continued, words pouring out. I didn't plan this, Jack. It happened so suddenly. An article I wrote caught their attention, and well, they want me to start as soon as possible. Jake stood, walking a few steps as he tried to process it. His mind swirled with the implications. Madison and the kids moving to New York, leaving him behind, losing his chance at fatherhood yet again. When do you have to decide? He asked, his voice rasping. By the end of the week, Madison replied, also standing. Jack, I don't know what to do. It's the opportunity of a lifetime, but the kids finally have you in their lives. I don't want to take that away from them. From you? Jake turned to face her, surprised by the anguish on her face. He realized the decision was as hard for her as it was for him. At that moment, something changed inside Jake. Years before, he would have responded with anger and accusations. But the man he had become, the father he was learning to be, saw things differently now. Sell the farm, he said suddenly. Madison blinked, confused. What? Sell the farm, Jake repeated, a new determination in his voice. I'll go with you to New York. Madison's jaw dropped. Jack, you can't be serious. This farm is your life, your heritage. Jake moved closer, taking Madison's hands in his. No, Marie, you and the kids are my life. The farm is just land and buildings. I can find work in New York, maybe even start my own business. What matters is that we stay together. Tears started streaming down Madison's face. But Jack, that's such a huge sacrifice. It's not a sacrifice when it's for love, Jake replied softly. Marie, I've already missed 3 years of our children's lives. I'm not missing another day. If New York is where your career will flourish, then that's where our family belongs. Madison hugged him tightly, sobbing into his chest. Are you sure about this, Jack? It's such a big change. Jake hugged her back, feeling a peace he hadn't felt in years. I'm absolutely sure. This is our chance at a new beginning, Marie, as a family. They remained locked in each other's arms for a long moment, the sun setting fully behind them. When they finally pulled apart, there was a new light in both their eyes. We have a lot of planning to do, Madison said, a hesitant smile tugging at her lips. Jake nodded, smiling in return. Yes, we do, but we'll do it together, like we should have from the start. Hand in hand, they walked back to the house. Jake felt a mixture of emotions, sadness at leaving the farm he had known all his life, but also a growing excitement for what lay ahead. When they entered, they saw Liam and Ava fast asleep on the couch where they had dozed off watching a movie. Jake and Madison watched them for a moment, hearts brimming with love. We'll give them the world, Jake whispered. Madison squeezed his hand. We already are, Jack. We're giving them a united family. That night, under the starry sky, plans were made, dreams were shared, and promises were renewed. The road ahead would be challenging, full of changes and adjustments, but Jake and Marie knew that together they could face anything. The future, once so uncertain, now shone with the promise of new beginnings and second chances. And for a family that had overcome so many obstacles, that was more than enough. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the kitchen of the Carter farm as Jake and Madison sat at the table, a stack of papers between them. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting a golden glow on the domestic scene. So Jake began, taking a sip of coffee. Let's go through this step by step. Madison nodded, picking up a pen. Right. Pros of moving to New York. My career would take a giant leap. The kids would have access to excellent schools and diverse cultural experiences. Jake continued. Cons. We'd be far from family and friends. The cost of living is much higher, and I'd have to start from scratch professionally." They spent the morning discussing, weighing each aspect of the decision. Their voices sometimes rose in disagreement, but always returned to a tone of mutual respect. "Jack," Madison said softly after a pause, "I know how much this farm means to you. It's your family's legacy. Are you sure you're willing to give it up?" Jake gazed out the window at the fields he knew so well. "It's hard, I won't lie. But Marie, I realize the true legacy I want to leave behind is our children, a strong, united family." Madison placed her hand over his on the table, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I love you for that, Jack, but I also don't want you to regret it or blame me someday." In that moment, an idea began forming in Madison's mind. What if we could have the best of both worlds? Jake tilted his head, curious. "What do you mean?" "I'll call the publishing house," Madison explained, excitement growing in her voice. "I'll see if I can negotiate a flexible work arrangement. Maybe I can work remotely most of the time, with occasional trips to New York." Jake's eyes lit up at the possibility. "That would be perfect. We could stay here, but you'd still have the chance to advance in your career." Madison was already picking up the phone, a determined smile on her face. "I'm going to make that call right now." The following days were a roller coaster of emotions as Madison negotiated with the publisher. There were moments of doubt and frustration, but also hope. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Madison hung up the phone with a radiant smile. "They agreed," she exclaimed, throwing herself into Jake's arms. "I can work from here, with monthly trips to New York. It's a bit less than the original position offered Samir, but it's perfect," Jake finished, hugging her tightly. "It's the ideal solution for our family." With the decision made, Jake and Madison began planning their future together. The farm, once only Jake's domain, now buzzed with renewed energy. Madison converted one of the empty rooms into her office, while Jake explored ways to expand and modernize the farm operations. "I've been thinking," Jake said one evening as they worked together in the kitchen, "we could start an organic product line. There's a growing market for that, and with your contacts in New York, we could really do something big." Madison smiled, loving the entrepreneurial spark in Jake's eyes. "That's brilliant. We could even write a book together about sustainable farming and family life." As the adults adapted to their new dynamic, Liam and Ava went through their own adjustments. At first, there was confusion and a few tantrums. "But why is Daddy always here now?" Ava asked one day, her voice laced with curiosity and a hint of jealousy over Madison's divided attention. Madison knelt down to her daughter's level, explaining softly, "Remember how we talked about different families? Well, our family is changing again. Daddy is going to live with us because we love each other and want to be together." Liam, always the quieter one, asked timidly, "He won't leave again, will he?" Jake's heart constricted at hearing that. He joined Madison, hugging both children. "No, buddy, I'm here to stay, forever." Over the weeks, a new routine settled in. Mornings were a whirl of activity, with Jake handling farm chores while Madison balanced her editor work and tending to the kids. Afternoons often saw them all together, helping Jake in the fields or listening to Madison read stories in her office. Evenings became special family time, shared dinners, board games, and long talks on the porch under the stars. Jake and Madison rediscovered an intimacy, reigniting the spark of their love as they navigated parenthood together. One Saturday, as they watched Liam and Ava play in the yard, Jake wrapped an arm around Madison. "You know," he said softly, "a few months ago I thought I'd lost everything. Now I look around and can hardly believe how rich I am." Madison snuggled against him, smiling. "We've built something beautiful here, haven't we? A real family." Jake nodded, his heart overflowing with gratitude. "More than I ever dreamed of, and I promise to cherish every moment." As the sun set over the farm, bathing the scene in golden light, Jake and Madison knew they had made the right choice. The path ahead wouldn't always be easy, but they would face every challenge together, as the family they were always meant to be. The morning sun cast a golden light over the Carter farm, as though blessing the special day ahead. Colorful balloons danced in the gentle breeze, tied to the freshly painted fence. The old farmhouse, now renovated, seemed to glow with new life. Jake leaned against the porch, watching the final preparations for the party. He could hardly believe a year had passed since everything changed. The sound of children's laughter pulled him from his thoughts. Liam and Ava ran across the yard, chasing one of the farm dogs. Today was their 4th birthday, and the farm was ready to celebrate not only another year of their lives, but also the family's rebirth. "They've grown so much," Madison's soft voice came from behind him. Jake turned, smiling at the sight of his wife, again carrying a tray of freshly baked cupcakes. "It's amazing how things can change in a year, isn't it?" Jake replied, taking the tray to help her. As they walked together to the backyard party table, memories of the past year flooded their minds. There had been challenges, of course. Adaptation hadn't been easy for any of them. Jake remembered nights waking in a sweat, afraid it was all a dream, and he'd be back to his lonely life. Madison recalled times the pressure of balancing her new job and family life seemed overwhelming. "Remember when I almost missed the deadline for my first big project because Ethan got sick?" Madison laughed softly. Jake nodded, remembering clearly. "You stayed up 36 hours straight, taking care of him and finishing the work. I'd never felt so helpless and so proud all at once. But for every difficult moment, there were dozens of precious ones. The first time Ava called Jake Daddy without hesitation. The pride on Liam's face when Jake showed him how to plant seeds. Evenings the whole family spent huddled in the living room, reading stories or simply enjoying each other's company. The sound of approaching cars brought them back to the present. Guests began arriving for the party. "We'd better get ready," Madison smiled, giving Jake a quick peck on the cheek before going inside. Hours later, the farm was teeming with life and joy. Friends, family, and neighbors came together to celebrate not only the twins' birthday, but also the miracle of a reunited family. In the midst of the festivities, Jake asked for everyone's attention. Holding Madison's hand, he looked around at the smiling faces. "A year ago, I didn't know if I'd have a family to call my own," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "Today, I'm here not only celebrating my incredible children's birthday, but also renewing my commitment to the woman who made it all possible." Madison gazed at him, surprised and touched. Jake knelt down, pulling a small box from his pocket. "Marie Thompson, would you do me the honor of marrying me again?" Tears streamed freely down Madison's face as she nodded, speechless. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers as Jake placed the ring on her finger, a new ring, symbolizing their new start. Right then and there, in the middle of the backyard decorated for a birthday party, Jake and Madison renewed their vows. It wasn't an elaborate ceremony, but it overflowed with love and meaning. Liam and Ava stood beside them, tiny witnesses to the love that brought them into the world and now held them together as a family. When the justice of the peace pronounced them once more husband and wife, Jake looked into Madison's eyes and saw their entire future reflected there. As the afternoon turned to evening, guests began to depart, leaving behind an atmosphere of joy and new memories. Jake and Madison sat on the porch, watching Liam and Ava play with their new presents in the sunset's glow. "You know," Madison said, leaning back against Jake's chest, "when I got that job offer in New York, I thought I had to choose between my career and my family. I never imagined we could have both." Jake kissed the top of her head, smiling. "You made it work. Your latest book is on the bestseller list, and you're still here every day, being an incredible mother." Madison smiled, thinking of how her professional life had flourished over the past year. Working remotely brought challenges, but also a flexibility she'd never known. Her monthly trips to New York had become part work, part family adventure, with Jake and the kids often joining her and turning business trips into mini vacations. "And you," she said, looking into Jake's eyes, You've turned this farm into something extraordinary. Who would have thought we'd have a successful organic operation and educational tours in just a year?" Jake laughed, recalling how the idea for tours sprang up almost accidentally when a group of students visited for a field trip. Now it was an integral part of their business, teaching people about sustainable farming and rural life. The sound of small footsteps broke their reverie. Liam and Ava hurried over, faces flushed with excitement. "Daddy, Mommy, come see. The fireflies are coming out," Liam exclaimed, tugging on Jake's hand. "Can we catch some in jars, please?" Ava begged, her eyes shining with anticipation. Jake and Madison exchanged a knowing glance before standing up. "Of course," Jake replied, lifting Ava into his arms. "But remember, we have to set them free afterward." As they walked toward the field, Jake with Ava in his arms and Madison hand in hand with Liam, the sky exploded with sunset colors. The first fireflies flickered, creating a magical dance of lights. Jake paused for a moment, taking in the scene. His family, reunited and happy. The farm, thriving and full of life. The future, bright and full of possibilities. "Everything okay, honey?" Madison asked, noticing his pause. Jake smiled, pulling her close and embracing his entire family. "More than okay," he said. "It's perfect." And there, under the starry sky, with fireflies dancing around them and the warmth of his family in his arms, Jake knew he had found his true home. It wasn't just the farm or the house, but the bond that held them together, forged through challenges and strengthened by love. The future might bring more challenges, more changes, but they would face it all together, as a family, as it was always meant to be.